3 years and over 20,000 sanctions later, Western governments face an uncomfortable question. Are Russian sanctions working? The numbers suggest considerable effort. Thousands of individuals blacklisted, billions in assets frozen, entire economic sectors restricted. Yet the conflict in Ukraine continues. Russian oil flows through alternative channels, and Moscow has successfully pivoted toward new economic partnerships. Something has gone profoundly wrong with the West's signature foreign policy response. Academic research from Tufts University offers a sobering assessment. International sanctions achieve their stated objectives roughly 34% of the time. When applied to Russia specifically, that success rate may prove optimistic. Rather than functioning as precision instruments of statecraft, sanctions increasingly resemble political theater, measures announced for headlines rather than results. Western allies possess collective economic power vastly exceeding Russia's. NATO members command roughly 27 times Russia's economic weight. Yet this advantage has translated into remarkably little strategic leverage. EU sanctions on Russia require consensus among 32 nations, each with competing interests and divergent risk tolerances. Decisions that should take days stretch into months. By the time measures are finalized, Russian planners have already identified workarounds. Internal UK government assessments reveal the gap between rhetoric and reality. Foreign Office analysis concluded that individual and entity sanctions lose practical impact within 6 months of imposition. More striking, 92% of UK travel bans targeted Russian citizens who had never visited Britain and had no intention of doing so. These are gestures crafted for political optics, not effectiveness. Rather than applying surgical pressure to genuine centers of power, Western measures often function as dragnet operations. Lists grow longer each quarter, populated by peripheral figures whose connection to Kremlin decision-making ranges from tenuous to non-existent. The UK Supreme Court's decision in Schvidler versus Secretary of State illustrates the problem. Eugene Schvidler, a British citizen, found his assets frozen globally, not for demonstrable wrongdoing, but because of his association with Roman Abramovich. The case rested, as one dissenting justice noted, on flimsy reasons and armchair theories. This guilt by association approach undermines the legitimacy EU sanctions require to function effectively. More than 55 law firms have reported breaches of UK sanctions rules since 2022. Not because of deliberate evasion, but because compliance requirements have grown so Byzantine that even sophisticated institutions struggle to navigate them. Herbert Smith Freehills was fined £465,000 for technical violations that reflected the practical impossibility of perfect compliance. These cases reveal sanctions frameworks increasingly criminalize good faith mistakes while delivering minimal strategic value. The impact of sanctions on Russia has proven far more limited than projected, while blowback effects on European economies exceeded expectations. Energy prices surged, driving inflation across the continent. The economic pain Western populations experienced fueled domestic political upheaval and populist narratives. Russia demonstrated considerable adaptive capacity. Trade flows redirected through non-sanctioned intermediaries. Until March 2022, the UK imported most of its gold from Russia. In April 2022, those imports shifted to Kazakhstan at identical volumes and values. Nothing changed except the nominal country of origin. Exclusion from SWIFT accelerated Moscow's adoption of China's cross-border interbank payment system. Cryptocurrency usage surged. Far from isolating Russia economically, sanctions catalyzed parallel financial infrastructure that reduces Western leverage over global commerce. Russia's strategic preparation deserves recognition. Moscow began focusing on grain production in 2000, deliberately diversifying from energy exports. Today, Russia controls nearly 25% of global wheat exports. European and African markets depend heavily on Russian grain, a dependency Moscow can leverage when energy sanctions threaten revenues. While European capitals debate quarterly adjustments, Moscow thinks in decades. Western sanctions validate Russian domestic narratives about Western hostility. For 25 years, Vladimir Putin has told Russian citizens that Europe and America seek to weaken Russia's economy and diminish its standing. Every sanctions package provides evidence for that claim. Economic hardships are attributed not to policy failures, but to Western economic warfare. Sanctions become tools that consolidate domestic support rather than fracture it. The fundamental problem is definitional. What does it mean for sanctions to work? If the goal was deterring invasion, they failed. The invasion proceeded. If the objective was forcing withdrawal, they failed. Russian forces remain. If the aim was regime change, they failed. Putin's grip appears secure. If the target was economic collapse, they failed. Russia's economy adapted. Russia's energy revenues declined 19% year over year in recent periods. That is disruption, but disruption unaccompanied by strategic behavioral change. Russian sanctions are not working if working requires achieving the foreign policy objectives they ostensibly serve. Instead, they function as signals, statements of disapproval that carry economic cost but fail to alter Moscow's calculations. 3 years and 20,000 sanctions later, the central question persists: are Russian sanctions working? Based on stated objectives and observable outcomes, the answer increasingly appears to be no. Sanctions have become symbols rather than solutions, gestures that demonstrate resolve without delivering results. Until Western capitals prioritize strategic effectiveness over political theater, that uncomfortable conclusion will remain difficult to escape.